There is a hospital corridor where nurses once refused to walk alone at night. Patients died there without warning, again and again. No one could ever fully explain why. A nurse stood frozen at the end of the hallway, holding her breath in the dark. She had just seen something she could never report. No committee would ever believe her. A single clear drop fell slowly from an IV line above an empty hospital bed. Small, silent, almost nothing. And yet, this quiet drop is where the story truly begins. He walked these long hospital halls calmly, unhurried, while everyone else rushed around him in a panic. Colleagues later said the same unsettling thing about him. He never once looked afraid. A patient chart closes softly in a stranger's steady hands. A name is filed away, forgotten by morning. This same pattern repeated itself in hospital after hospital for nearly 17 years. I am a surgical resident myself, still in training. I have stood in rooms like the one where this story begins. The line between healer and killer is thinner than people think. Southern Illinois, the late 1970s. A young medical student sat quietly in ambulances after class, watching the dying with a strange fascination that worried the people around him. His classmates noticed something unusual about him first, long before any professor did. He seemed strangely drawn to patients on the edge of death. At least 5 later died under his watch. One quiet night, a nurse discovered something deeply wrong buried inside a patient's chart. Numbers had been changed, signatures forged. A routine checkup that, in reality, had never actually happened. Weeks before graduation, the fraud in his paperwork was discovered by faculty. The committee nearly expelled him that week. One professor argued for mercy instead, and that single vote changed everything. He graduated a year late, but he graduated with a real medical degree. His classmates gave him a dark nickname that summer: 00 Swango, a quiet license to kill. Nobody around him meant it seriously at the time, not really. It was dark, exhausted humor shared between overworked students. None of them imagined the name would later feel like a warning. A signature scrawled quickly on a form, a checkup box ticked without ever seeing the patient inside that room. Small, quiet lies, buried deep in routine paperwork, easy for anyone to miss. A disciplinary committee sat around a long table deciding his future in medicine. Papers spread out before them. Smoke hung faintly in the air. One vote stood between him and expulsion. He walked out of that hearing a free man that afternoon, free to finish his final year of medical school without further question, free to become a licensed physician somewhere in America. A fresh diploma sat on a desk under cold, pale morning light. No real celebration in that room, no genuine warmth anywhere, just paper and a name soon to mean something terrible. Students still joked about him in stairwells between exhausting classes, half laughing, half uneasy. The dark nickname followed him around campus for years. Some of them, deep down, actually meant it. 1983. Ohio State, a large and deeply respected teaching hospital. Inside it, a new surgical intern, eager, sharp, confident, and already troubling to the nurses who worked closest to him. Rena Cooper, 69 years old, was recovering from a routine back surgery that had gone well. She trusted the calm young doctor checking on her that particular evening shift. He entered her hospital room quietly that night, closing the heavy door most of the way behind himself. Nobody else on the floor was watching. Nobody else on duty needed to know. A syringe held perfectly steady in one calm hand. No hesitation on his face, no trembling in his fingers, just the precision of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment before. Inside her IV line, something entered her bloodstream that should never have been there. Her body had no warning at all of what was slowly starting to happen to her. Rena's calm face changed suddenly in the dim hospital light. Her muscles locked without warning. She could not speak, could not call for help, and could not move a single muscle. A young nursing student rushed frantically down the hallway, badly alarmed by what she had witnessed. Doctors fought hard to keep Rena breathing through the night. Somehow, she barely survived until morning. The hospital investigated the incident, but far too quietly for what had happened. They simply called it paranoia and moved on. They let the intern finish his rotation without real consequence. Weeks later, 3 separate doctors ate a lunch that he had personally prepared and served to them himself. Within a few hours, all 3 men became violently and mysteriously ill. One doctor collapsed hard over a bathroom sink, pale, shaking, and clearly frightened. Nobody publicly connected that moment to the calm intern who had served everyone their lunch that same day. Hospital leaders met privately behind closed doors to discuss the growing situation. They chose careful silence over any public scandal reaching the press. His surgical offer was quietly withdrawn instead of investigated. A thin file slid into a locked cabinet drawer and simply stayed there for years, untouched. Ohio State let him leave the hospital without ever once calling the local police. 1984. Quincy, Illinois, a small, quiet town. He became a paramedic now, riding ambulances daily, surrounded by co-workers who slowly began to fear him more with every shift. His clean paramedic uniform hung neatly inside a narrow locker room down the hall. Colleagues later remembered him admiring violent crime stories during long, quiet shifts. He seemed strangely drawn to death. One ordinary September morning, he brought a box of fresh donuts into the shared break room for everyone. A small, generous gesture, almost thoughtful. Nobody around that table suspected anything at all. Within 1 hour, several of his co-workers became suddenly and violently sick without warning. Cramping, vomiting, dizziness spreading through the small station. Nobody understood why simple donuts could do this. Inside a cramped bathroom, one exhausted paramedic gripped the cold sink, pale and shaking with pain. This kept happening to different people, again and again, shortly after he had been near. Suspicious co-workers slowly began watching him closely during every shift they shared together. Something about his calm demeanor never quite matched the chaos happening loudly around him nearly every single time. Someone finally worked up the courage to search his gym bag while he was away on another call. What they found hidden there would quietly change everything that followed. Ant poison bottles sat unlabeled at the bottom of the bag, half hidden under folded clothes. Chemicals that had no clear reason to be sitting inside any paramedic's personal belongings at all. Police later searched his small apartment and found a hidden notebook tucked inside a drawer. Inside were detailed handwritten recipes for ricin, botulism, and heavily concentrated cyanide, written in careful handwriting. His remaining co-workers quietly set a simple trap of their own inside the station kitchen. A full pitcher of unsweetened iced tea, left completely alone, waiting silently for someone to return. When they returned to the break room, the tea had somehow turned distinctly sweet. Someone had added something to it, while no one else in the station had been watching that room. Police cars arrived outside his apartment building later that night without warning. Red and blue lights swept silently across the brick walls outside. His short career as a paramedic was finally over. He served just 2 years in prison and walked out a free man again in 1987. Free, and it seemed, already quietly planning how to practice medicine again somewhere new. He legally changed his birth name to Daniel Adams shortly after his release from prison that year. A carefully forged document falsely claimed his civil rights had already been fully restored. Application after application, he steadily typed his way back into hospital jobs across several different states. Each new form buried his real, documented history a little deeper beneath fresh paperwork. South Dakota, 1992. Sanford Medical Center hired him without hesitation, completely unaware of who Daniel Adams truly was underneath that carefully constructed new name and forged background. He walked the bright hospital hallways there with total, easy confidence once again. Colleagues trusted him instantly, without a second thought. Nobody there yet knew what Ohio State had quietly buried. A young nurse named Kristen Kinney worked closely alongside him during several long shared shifts that year. She smiled at him the way people smile at someone they have learned to trust. They grew close together that year, walking quiet hospital corridors side by side during slow evening shifts. Nobody around them at the time suspected anything unusual slowly beginning between the two. A national medical board investigated his background more closely than Sanford ever had before hiring him. A single envelope arrived at the hospital office. Everything began quietly unraveling for him after that. He read the letter alone at his cluttered desk late one evening. His outward expression barely changed while reading it, but something behind his eyes had already gone noticeably cold. Kristen began suffering from severe, unexplained migraines that same difficult year, with no clear medical cause anyone could find. Nobody around her yet connected the sudden pain back to him. He resurfaced soon after in New York, working psychiatry rotations at a busy veterans hospital near the coast. Once again, without warning, patients there started dying with no clear explanation. An elderly war veteran lay quietly in his narrow hospital bed that week, weak and visibly struggling to breathe. Thin tubes kept him barely stable through each long, difficult night. Kristen grew noticeably paler that season, increasingly withdrawn and quietly suffering in private. Something deep inside her body was slowly breaking down, though no one around her understood why. 4 difficult months after the two of them parted ways for good, Kristen Kinney tragically took her own life. Her later autopsy revealed traces of arsenic hidden inside her body. A grieving mother made a single phone call that terrible night, one that would eventually reach 2 separate hospital deans. After all those years, the buried truth was finally catching up. Formal warning letters went out that month to well over 1,000 hospitals scattered across the country. His real, documented history could finally, at long last, no longer be hidden. A fresh passport was stamped firmly at a busy customs counter overseas not long after. He was already leaving the country behind, searching for somewhere nobody had ever heard his name. Zimbabwe, 1994. A small, quiet mission hospital in the countryside welcomed a new foreign doctor that spring, unaware of everything already happening back home across the ocean. He walked calmly between rows of hospital beds there, patients trusting him from the very first day. The same unsettling calm that had quietly worried colleagues back home years earlier. A kind local woman cooked him a warm dinner one evening inside her modest countryside kitchen nearby. A few hours later, she became violently and unexplainably ill without obvious cause. A local surgeon quickly suspected deliberate poisoning after examining her that same week. Hair samples were sent overseas for detailed laboratory testing. The results soon confirmed his worst private suspicion. The lab report slowly traveled from Zimbabwe to Interpol and finally reached the American FBI months later. After nearly a decade of near misses, investigators were finally closing in on him. Federal agents carefully pinned locations across a large paper world map on their office wall. connecting hospitals scattered across several continents that had never once spoken to each other. June 1997, Chicago, O'Hare Airport, crowded with ordinary travelers that afternoon. He was calmly walking toward a connecting flight to Saudi Arabia, a small suitcase in one hand. Federal agents were already waiting for him near the gate that afternoon. Handcuffs closed around his wrists in front of startled travelers. 17 years of quiet suspicion finally became an arrest. He first pled guilty only to fraud charges that year and was sentenced to a short prison term. The judge permanently banned him from ever touching hospital food or medication again. Just days before his scheduled release, federal prosecutors suddenly charged him with murder instead. 3 bodies exhumed quietly from the Veterans Hospital had tested clearly positive for lethal poison. Inside the courtroom, his own personal notebook was formally entered as damning evidence against him. Investigators calmly read passages describing the strange thrill he felt from watching people die. One lead prosecutor read his own chilling written words aloud, slowly, in front of the courtroom that morning. The packed room stayed utterly silent as each sentence was spoken. He sat quietly at the defense table throughout, his expression almost completely unreadable, hands calmly folded in his lap. He showed almost no visible reaction to anything being said. September 2000, inside a crowded federal courtroom. He formally pled guilty to 3 separate murders that morning. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms in prison. He was quietly transported under heavy guard shortly afterward, handcuffed tightly in the back of a van. Riding silently toward a federal prison built to permanently hold dangerous men like him. Today, he still lives inside a supermax prison hidden in rural Colorado, far from everyone he once knew. Isolated there permanently for the rest of his natural life. Somewhere tonight, an old operating room sits completely empty and dark. A single overhead lamp still swings gently above the table. The line between a healer and a killer never fully closes.